for many organizations, I think that if they don't really move quickly to rethink what does the operation manual, what does franchise support, what does facilitating our playbook look like in an AI era, they're going to discover that operationally they're a bit of a house of cards.
Welcome, everybody, to What's Next in Franchising. My name is Travis Martin, and I'm here with a man who wears many hats. Not only is he a good friend of mine, he is the CEO of Know How and a seasoned franchise leader. And we're here to talk about not only where the franchise industry is today, but where it's going. Leighton Healey, good to see you, man. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. Good. Long time listener, first time caller. Uh, and no, hey man, I spent I had a very uh, successful and instructive career in franchising, both on the franchisee side and the franchisor side. Was kind of the superstar on both sides, and now live in the world of AI and just kind of live and breathe. Where are the opportunities for franchisors and franchisees in this transformational era that we live in? And I like to geek out on all the, let's call it, the weedy topics on franchising, and weedy they are.
Well, I think that this is such a critical time for us to come up for air in the franchise industry. You've been in both franchising and technology for almost 2 decades now, and there's this quote that I've heard before. It talks about history, right? And it says there are decades where weeks happen, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And it feels like, you've been in the industry, technology and franchising for 2 decades, but every single week it feels like we're making a fundamental step forward when it comes to technology, when it comes to franchising regulation. And so that's what we're going to get into today. We've got three news stories that are affecting franchisees, franchisors, how the industry and the landscape is shifting throughout the United States and Canada, all across North America. And our goal is to understand, how does this affect what's next in franchising? So anyone who's listening to this for the first time, which is everyone, because this is the first time we've ever done this before, what you can expect over the next 15-20 minutes is an insider's perspective on the shifting landscape in franchising, how technology is affecting it, how regulation is affecting it. And I'm really excited, like you said, Leighton, to get into the weeds. So let's kick things off with our first story this morning. This is related to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, and they are updating franchise disclosure expectations for franchises. This was announced a while back, and it's coming into effect in 2026. And so, high level, what you need to know about the FTC rule updates, by the way, don't just listen to this podcast and be like, all right, now I know. Go do the research yourself. This is going to affect your franchise. But at a very high level, franchise agreements and FDDs must be clearer now. They have to have greater transparency into where money's coming from. What are the technology fees? Let's go really into the weeds there. No more hidden fees in technology fees. And you can't just let those super high performers make it look like your franchise is maybe more successful than they actually are. Leighton, you've been in franchising for decades now. Give me your gut reaction on what this means and who wins in this scenario.
Well, I think that I don't know if it's winners or losers as much as it is. The FTC plays such a fundamental role in franchising, and the franchise disclosure document, this FTD, is such a central tool that I would say it's not really who wins and loses. It's just the new posted speed limit, and so now you adapt to it. I think that fundamentally, having personally, been involved in, the FTD process, having disclosed, I don't know, enormous amounts of prospective franchisees, and had to sit down across the table with existing franchisees. And you sit across this Z who's already been a bit of a been maybe a bit pushing back on the return on, I like to call it return on royalty, like the ROR that they're receiving. And now you've got to get them on board with some kind of new agreement element or whatnot. So I don't think it's about who wins or loses. I think that what we're seeing is over the last few years, we're seeing just a number of calculated changes at the FTC that are not signaling loosening of the role of the FTD. So what does that mean? I think that really what it means is organizations that have been thinking about the FTD as this, let's call it administrative, burdensome, seasonal, rhythm, much like the audit, much like say kind of filing taxes or whatnot. Oh, the FTD season's coming. I think that they have to move from this let's call it this posture of this is something that we do from a operational, somewhat defensive standpoint to really take the offense and say, look, really the narrative today is really around transparency. The narrative today is no longer around FTD as a defensive posture, but FTD as how we really lead and lean in as a transparent network. And so, there's so many things that are arguably paradoxical about the franchising world. On one side, you see the FTC pulling back a franchisor's ability to enforce and drive, let's call it consistency. But at the same time, the FTD hinges on the ability to have, shared consistent financials, from all these franchises. And so at the end of the day, getting franchisees to format their financials in a consistent manner, submit them in a consistent manner. I mean, it's there is something a person could, I would say, in a very loving way, kind of give a wink to the FTC and say, it sounds like you want your cake and you want to eat it too. Like you want loosened operational, structure, and at the same time, you're really doubling down on this document that in many ways requires financial operational consistency to be able to produce the level of transparency that they're asking for. So what do you do with that? I mean, I think fundamentally, I love finding, let's call it differentiators that are in reaction to things that broadly impact every single franchise network. And so when something comes down from the FTC, it comes down to everybody, right? And so again, it's one thing to say how do we pivot and how do we adjust? It's another thing to say how do we differentiate? And so I see the opportunity to just, embrace the reality. The FTD is going to continue to become an increasingly more, let's call it, contested document. And so, what does that look like? Well, for Fran Dev teams, I think it's about leaning into it and saying, hello prospect, hello Discovery Day attendee. We are a network of trust. And one of the things that you need to understand is that we believe that transparency and disclosure allows you to act like an adult and to build trust with us. And so we're going to lead with trust. And then if you join our network, we expect trust and transparency in return. And so we are going to take the first step and role model it in the way that we disclose. And disclose is kind of this meaty term, but essentially open up the books and help you to understand the reality of let's call it the opportunity that you're considering. Um, so I mean, ultimately, the balance of operational overreach at the franchisor level with, let's call it, the trust that has to be maintained and established across the network, it's a tricky balance. And I really think that the networks that will continue to stand out will be the ones that say, look, let's stop taking a defensive operational posture with this FTD. Let's lean into this era of transparency and let's make it part of our sales process. Um, and I think that the opportunity there is to try to attract a prospect who I think is a level-headed, pragmatic franchise prospect who doesn't think that the world runs on rainbows, right? Like they recognize that there are you know complex variables that go into these businesses, and how do we help them make a informed decision, and how do we get ahead of some of the obvious, let's call it, objections that they might have related to, I don't know, some things that a very transparent FTD might call out.
I've heard you say before, good fences make great neighbors. And this feels like a step towards maybe improving the quality of the fence and just helping everyone understand ahead of time what we're getting into with a little bit more objectivity and starting that relationship on a more transparent note.
Anytime you drive through like a planned community, which is just like a suburb, where they have shared fence lines. I mean, sometimes you drive through and you're like, man, what a shabby fence. You know what I mean? And you're like, oh man, like I remember when I was in franchising, I was in home and commercial painting, and I just would drive by these massive communities and see these like these fences for miles. And I'm like, oh, can you imagine? I could just drop a crew there for a month, right? And then you realize that again, like they to your point, they don't value this. Let's call it this like shared, consistent friends and whatnot. And so, at the end of the day, I think that there is just an opportunity for a franchisor to just get ahead of this, change the narrative and just say, hey, 2026, this is an era of AI. This is an era of knowledge. This is an era of discovery, and we are going to really embrace the value of transparency and really invite our franchisee partners to respond as adults.
And we know that is going to be an ongoing discussion, relationship. The FTC, there's always, aspects that they're trying to improve or modify. So this is, one stamp in time, and we'll see how that continues to evolve over the course of 2026. Let's move on to our second story here. Entrepreneurs Franchise 500 was just recently released. And this is something that a lot of businesses look forward to every year. They get their LinkedIn posts ready for the announcement. And in this podcast, we have a specific focus on home and commercial services. And there's lots of good home and commercial service representation on this list. Very encouraging. Leighton, when you looked through that list of, fastest growing top 500 franchises in the industry, what stood out to you?
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, shout out to Entrepreneur Magazine. It's such a great um, win-win, I think, symbiotic effort that they put out every year. And having personally know many of the leaders at franchise networks that were recognized. It's a point of pride. It's a great I would say um, high five moment for them to be able to infuse energy into their team early in Q1 as they jump into a new year. A lot of franchise networks have their conventions in the first quarter of the year, and so to be able to have that to share. I mean, the downstream effects, and it's what you do with it, right? Like at the end of the day, it's what you do with the recognition. But I would say broadly, it's a big deal. Franchise networks, kind of like anybody going to an awards show, they've all got a speech prepared in their pocket, and they all look surprised, but they're all hoping that it comes through. I mean, I would say when we think about just our previous topic around just this, I think this era of increased demand for transparency, visibility brings pressure. Make no mistake, right? And so when you are in the spotlight, yes, your fran dev teams are going to update their sales deck, and yes, your franchisees are going to add it to their email footer so that it communicates to the market that we are a recognizable and respected brand. Yes, I think that the Zors are going to get very excited internally around how they can be able to kind of maintain the success moment. I mean, there's so many benefits, and there's pressure because when you're in the limelight, I think one of the things that we have to consider for is it will naturally increase lead flow. I mean, whether you're using a franchise broker, I mean, when a franchise broker is promoting a brand, one of the things he or she is going to say is, and you'll be happy to know that they have recently been recognized on the Entrepreneur Franchise 500, or they've been on the list for the last three of the last 4 years, or whatever, right? And so it's no question, it's a meaningful thing. Now, I think that in this era of increased scrutiny, I think that also means that when you think about FTC regulations, you think about ambulance chasing kind of legal opportunities and stuff like that. No question, when you put yourself on a stage, you become also I think the where some of these things laser in on because anytime a person's trying to drive a change, enact a new regulation, they want to make sure that it's being done not on some, Timbuktu, network that no one is really paying attention to, but I think they want to be able to, see how, let's call it, these very visible, recognizable, and praiseworthy brands are reacting to these things. So, um, if you're on the list, I think it's great. You're going to see a lot more lead flow, but keep in mind that just brand promise versus operational reality is just going to get throttled up, and new franchisees, their expectations rise because they expect that they bought a winner, chicken dinner, right? They expect they bought a winner, and so with that comes all of the expectations that come with that perception.
All right, so final story today. We are seeing a high level shift in consumer behavior. You might remember, fast forward 5 years ago, COVID pandemic was raging. It was affecting work, it was affecting school, it was affecting people's hobbies, right? We saw an increased level of do it yourself home remodeling and people taking up woodworking in their free time. Well, 5 years later, we're seeing a trend away from that do it yourself home service back to the professionals. So great for the industry, for a lot of us who are servicing and in that industry. But like you said, Leighton, that increased demand is going to come with increased expectations as well. When you look at this data that's indicating that more and more consumers are handing the tool belt back over to the pros, how do you read that? What's your gut level of how it's going to affect the industry that we're in over the course of the next few years?
I think I think broadly, it's not an unfair generalization to say that this DIY do-it-yourself era is, I don't want to say maybe over, maybe over. I think we're entering in a new execution and efficiency. Let's call it like household task triage era. So, gone are the days where it seems everywhere I turned in an airport or a hotel lobby that the TV is playing some family having their home transformed by some reality TV show, right? And or some set of twins who are realtors who transform people's. I mean, it's not to say that people don't care about home ownership and people don't care about restoring castles in the French, in the French countryside. Um, at the end of the day, I just think broadly speaking, I think it's a great shift for service-based franchises, particularly because for a variety of reasons, what we're seeing is consumer trends towards outsourcing and a person could say offboarding a lot of these services back to vendors and back to contractors and service providers. And so, again, I mean, a lot of consumers, how the way they discover services is through their mobile devices, through their phones. Um, and I think that, so naturally, franchise brands tend to really set the tone and set the pace when it comes to, SEO and digital discovery and whatnot. And so I think that we're just coming into a new era of, I would say, uh, consumer reliance on service providers and a new era of the consumer referral. The consumer referral. I think that you're seeing a lot of social dynamics rise where people are making it part of their water cooler talk in terms of who they use for this and who they used for that. And so I think we're back in, not that it's never gone away, but I think that consistent brand promise complicated by loosening over operational constraint, but I think that the era of, let's call it, brand promise and the era of customer experience, it never went away. I just think that if that was in the symphony of all of the common instruments that is part of the orchestra that is franchising, brand promise and customer experience is just those parts are being asked to just really play a much more central role. And so, yeah, I think the DIY era, I don't keep an eye on Lowe's and Home Depot stock, but I do think that it'd be interesting to monitor how they begin to adjust kind of their marketing and kind of their overall, I would say, their pitch to consumers. And increasingly, I think there's such a great opportunity to be able to lead with ease, predictability, to be able to lead with, let us take that off your plate. Let us create more time for you as the homeowner. People are busy, and I would say the average homeowner is a pretty busy beaver right now, and so I think there's so much opportunity. Now, I will say, what that highlights is the elephant in the room is the rise of, let's call it, consumer service demand with the strain on the workforce, which, the number one challenge I think is sourcing and onboarding talented hands and feet that can be an extension of your brand, and doing so considering the, let's call the minefield of consistent operational network wide training, and the challenges that, yeah, just plain and simple, there are just there is a there is just a low supply of tradecraft labor. And so how networks respond to that, I think, is a combination of, just really re-envisioning training, really re-envisioning how they think about incentivizing their franchisees to value, kind of like, in a sense, almost, put their hands up to understand the value of a consistent brand experience, um, and to get back to basics in many ways.
Hmm. I want to put a bow on this entire discussion. And one of the themes that I hear across all three of these news stories, Leighton, is the need in 2026 to invest in operational sophistication, right? The FTC is demanding more transparency and just a level of operational rigor to go into that FDD to make sure that that's part of the initial discussions between a franchisor and a potential franchisee. When you think of these entrepreneur top 500 companies, these are companies that take their business seriously. They take operations seriously. And when you think of that homeowner who used to do everything themselves, you can imagine a world where they're like, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to call a local company. And then that local company sends someone in who, frankly, is not doing much better of a job than they would have if they just had YouTube open and were doing it themselves. And so that level of sophistication is going to need to be invested in order for companies to be able to ride the wave of these trends that we talked about today. Leighton, I'm curious, as you evaluate that, you know, maybe give some parting words to someone who's listening and they say, I know that our operations, I'd give us a C plus, a B minus. We're not failing, we're not bleeding out in the street because of it, but there's certainly opportunity to improve. Why would you say that 2026 is the year to really invest in this area?
I would say, plain and simple, the reason why this is the year to invest in greater operational sophistication is to just recognize where the wind is blowing. Right now, the macro winds are driving people to consider home and commercial service franchising, and it's driving, I would say, organic opportunity, opportunity and organic lead flow. And where I would say there is just always drag or headwinds, right, is the ability to be able to provide a sophisticated, streamlined, we would say, support experience to that franchise network. The in the third leg, that is a three-legged stool that represents the franchise, the system, the way we do things, right? And to be able to find more efficient ways to leverage AI around that core component is, I think, going to be a big difference maker. Franchisors, they rely on, let's just call it, the Herculean effort of their franchisor ops team. And sometimes I think you can, over rely on the enthusiasm and excitement that things like, recognition brings to your network, and, and putting more dots on the map, and forget that there might be some internal. So for many organizations, I think that if they don't really move quickly to rethink what does the operation manual, what does, franchise support, what does facilitating our playbook look like in an AI era, I think they'll discover that rather than being able to capitalize on some of these exciting macro dynamics that I think are going to blow tremendous candidates into their Fran Dev pipeline, and tremendous consumer interest in their services, I think they're going to discover that operationally they're a bit of a house of cards, and they're going to find themselves really in a place where their franchise base, are going to become a source of friction as they feel under-supported and perhaps forgotten, and the franchise teams will just find themselves divided. And so rather than fighting a two-front war, double down on this AI opportunity to enhance your franchise support experience, so that you hit, you know, as a member of our team says, I like to say, hit two birds with one stone. I think she said, feed two birds with one stone, so that you can effectively support the operational base, again, provide that transparency, and at the same time, to be able to meet the demand that I think is rising. I'm really bullish on home and commercial service franchise opportunities right now.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you, Leighton, for your seasoned perspective, and to combine decades of wisdom with the very unique time that we're in right now, as artificial intelligence is really beginning to saturate itself in the industry. This need for operational rigor. I couldn't think of a better time to have this discussion. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. If this episode was valuable for you, please do two things: subscribe to this podcast, and head to tryknowhow.com for a little bit more information on how we can help you increase your operational bench strength for your franchise in 2026. We'll see everyone on the next episode.